today's video is going to be a relaxing but hopefully informative beginner's guide to beer. I really enjoy beer. Those who come out to my live streams know that I like to try out a different and new craft beer every stream. It's kind of become a bit of a stream tradition, and there's never been a better time to explore the world of beer because there are so many different styles and flavors, so many interesting ideas from so many different craft breweries and mainstream ones as well. But that diversity of flavors and options can be pretty intimidating, right? Maybe you're the kind of person who goes to the store, looks at the wall of beer options or the giant cooler full, and you just feel overwhelmed, like you don't even know where to begin. Or maybe you're the kind of person that looks at a beer list at a restaurant and you think, oh, I'd like to try something different, be a little adventurous, but you're not sure if you're going to enjoy any of the beers there. You don't know what the different styles mean, and you're too embarrassed to ask the waiter or waitress what they mean. Or maybe you just don't even drink beer really yet, but you keep hearing about all these beers that sound good, words like chocolatey or juicy or fruity used to describe them, and you're curious what all the fuss is about. Or maybe you like beer just fine, but maybe you stick to what you know. You have like a lager style beer that you really like a Bud Light or a PBR, or maybe you enjoy Corona or something, but you're curious about branching out and you're not sure where to start. Well, if any of those sound like you, then this video is for you. I hope that it will help introduce you to the basics of beer, what goes into beer, what makes all these different styles different and interesting, what to expect out of some of the most common and popular styles that you're likely to see in the liquor store or on a restaurant drink list. I'll be starting off by talking about the primary ingredients that go into beer, because we need to know what goes into beer before we can talk about what makes each style unique. And then we will talk about the family tree of beer, where I will give examples of some of these common styles. I'll be opening a few cans, doing a few tastings, and I've got a whiteboard here, so I'll draw it all out. Hopefully that'll make a little bit more sense for you that way. Now, I should make it clear before we get any further that I am no brewer. I have never brewed anything in my life. I am simply a fan. I simply enjoy drinking beer. And because of that, I can't promise that everything I say here is going to be 100% accurate. Like I said, I'm no professional, but I have attempted to do my research properly, and hopefully I can be a trustworthy source for you. That being said, if you are a beer aficionado, or perhaps even a professional, maybe you are a brewer or a hobbyist brewer, whatever, and you happen to notice something I say in error, please feel free to let us know down in the comments. I'm always looking to learn myself. And finally, last thing before we jump on in, I want to make it clear that I am an advocate for responsible alcohol consumption. It's fine to to enjoy an alcoholic beverage now and again if you are of age in your country of residence, and you know that it's not a health risk above and beyond the normal health risk that it poses for you. But it is, of course, really, really unhealthy to consume a lot of alcohol. That goes for beer, but it goes for any kind of alcohol. Alcohol is, after all, a poison. And we know these days that there really is no safe amount of alcohol that you can consume and not take on some, level of risk. So please, if you're going to drink, please be sure to drink responsibly, be kind to yourself, and be mindful and take care of those around you as well. For my part, as I said, I'm going to be tasting a variety of beers here tonight. I think about 8 different styles I have lined up, but to keep things from getting too out of control, I'm going to be just doing small tasters from little 2-ounce shot glasses here, so that should be, sufficient for us to take a look at the color and, cloudiness or clarity of the beers, but not so much that I'm going to be slurring my words by the end of the video, at least I hope not. It's kind of like a tasting flight. I'm going to sort of be doing a tasting flight for myself here, so that is my attempt to keep things responsible here. So with all that said, let's dive into it. The beginner's guide to beer. So as I said, we're going to start off by talking about the ingredients, what goes into beer. And we'll talk a little bit about the brewing process along the way. So as it turns out, beer is actually pretty simple fundamentally. There are only 4 basic core ingredients in beer: water, malt, hops, and yeast. Some beers and breweries might choose to add other things, ingredients to change the flavor or the color or the mouth feel of the beer or the carbonation in the beer, these sorts of things. But every beer uses at least those 4 fundamental ingredients. And we're going to talk about each of them in turn here. Now, I do have here a whiteboard. And I know this is not the most relaxing, soporific color. It's bright white. But I think we're going to try and use it to draw out some of this stuff. And hopefully that's a good little visual aid for you. So let's start with, I'm going to write here, ingredients. Okay. And underneath that, I know you want to see what's on here. It's really hard for me to draw on it while I'm holding it up though, so I'm just gonna draw it on here and then I'll show you in a second. We have water, which is gonna be, just draw a cup of water here. Also, my artistic skills are not that impressive, so you'll have to excuse me. Water. Then we've also got malt, and for that, I'm just gonna, actually I didn't really think about how to do this, but we're just gonna, I don't know, draw some little grainy looking, barley or wheat sheaths. And then we're gonna have hops, which again I'm not sure how this is gonna look, but sure, that looks a bit like hops. And then the last one is yeast. And yeast is pretty hard to draw, but it's going to be kind of like blobby bits. Just like blobby things. Yeast is, of course, a microorganism, so this is blown way up. Okay. Y'all get to judge my artistry here. There, how about that? What do you think? Maybe I should have done it this way. Probably would have given us a better, space to work on. But anyway, there you go. So we've got water, malt, hops, and yeast. And then maybe I'll put on here also just a kind of dotted circle question mark, which can be other. Like I said, there can be other stuff that goes into beer. And all of these combine together into beer. And we'll talk a bit about how exactly they do that and the role of each ingredient. I'm going to make the line for other dotted as well, just to indicate that it can be there, but it doesn't have to be. We will talk about what some of those other additives might be too. Oh, I need to put a little beer mug. I know this would be way more exciting for you guys if you could see what I'm doing. But I think I need to get an easel, maybe, so I can. How does the beer mug even look, you guys? It's just gonna look kind of like the beer mug emoji, but way worse. Way worse. Put some foam on top. A little dripping down the side. There's a handle. All right. What do you think? I think that'll do. Okay. And then down below that, we'll do our little family tree of beer. But first, let's talk about each of these ingredients in turn. So, water's pretty self-explanatory, really. I'm sure that some breweries care, quite a bit about specifically the kind of water and the, minerals in the water and where they get it from. But for our purposes, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Malt, however, the second one here, is maybe not quite so clear. So malt is the grain that forms the beer's flavor backbone. It's pretty critical to the overall beer. It's often barley, that's the most common, but it might also include wheat or oats, and less commonly other grains like rye or rice or even corn in some cases. In fact, we'll have an example of a beer with some corn in it here today. And before brewing, these grains are soaked in water. This is called steeping. And then they're allowed to germinate, so start to grow. And then that growth is stopped and the grains are heat dried. That could be for just a little bit of drying or a little bit of time, so they dry out, or it can be for longer so that they start to roast. But at any rate, this process converts the starches in those grains into sugars, which then feed the yeasts, these guys right here, these little microbes, and the yeasts convert those sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Now, the yeast doesn't necessarily eat up all of the sugars that are coming out of the malts, and the residual sugars that are left behind influence the color and the flavor of the beer. And we'll talk a bit more about that a bit later. But that's what the malt is. It's the grains that go into the beer and feed the yeasts. Now, hops. This is one that I think a lot of people know that hops go into beer, but hops are kind of mysterious for some. And I think a lot of the time people think that if a beer is really strongly bitter, then that means it has hops. But if it's not bitter, that means it doesn't have hops. But that's not the case. Pretty much every single beer, really, all of them, have hops in them in some amount. Some have less, some have more. There's different varieties of hops as well, as we'll talk about. But what are hops anyway? Hops are the flowers of a climbing plant called Humulus lupulus. That's the Latin name for it. And it's actually in the same family as cannabis. And they are used in beer brewing to add flavor and aroma to the beer, as well as a natural preservative. Traditionally, hops were used as a bittering agent because the sugary solution that comes from the malts, what they call the wort, which is sort of a beer precursor, is very sweet, and the bittering agent, the hops, were added to counterbalance that sweetness. However, in more recent years, recent decades, let's say, many different varieties of hops have been created through selective breeding, resulting in a very wide array of flavors and aromas, ranging from piney or grassy to very dank to juicy and tropical and bright. There's a whole spectrum of flavors of hops available these days that back in the day weren't available. So just because a beer has a lot of hops in it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be bitter. So I think there is this association between hops and bitterness, but it's not always the case. Moreover, there are different ways which hops can be added to a beer at different points in the brewing process and in different forms, which can affect the bitterness or how aromatic those hops may be. So lots of ways that brewers have these days to control the effect of the hops on the flavor and aromas of the final brew. And like I mentioned, hops also do have natural antibacterial properties which help extend a beer's shelf life. That's maybe a bit less critical these days because of refrigeration and cold storage and whatnot. But back in the day, it was critical for shipping beer around the world. And one particularly popular style, the India Pale Ale, is known for being quite heavily hopped, and that was done historically to preserve the beer for its journey from England all the way to British colonies in India. So hops have that function as well. Finally, we have the yeasts, right? We've talked about the water, the malt, water, malt, hops, yeast. What is the the yeast is where the magic happens. Yeasts are a microscopic, single-celled fungus. So they're a little living creature. And this is the ingredient that does the actual fermenting of the beer. As I mentioned earlier, the yeasts feed on the sugars. I think I really do need to get an easel. It would make this so much easier. The yeasts feed on the sugars from the malts, and in doing so, they then produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. The alcohol, of course, gives the beer its alcohol, and you can have more or less. Some beers have not that much, some have quite a bit, typically ranging from about 3% on the low end up to maybe like 12 or 13% on the high end. And that's getting into the range of wine at that point. And the carbon dioxide that the yeast produce gives a beer its fizziness. So the yeast is quite crucial. There would be no beer without the yeast. And as you'll see shortly, there are different kinds of yeasts which have a significant impact on the type of beer that you are brewing. So these are the 4 key ingredients in all beers: water, malt, hops, and yeast. But as I mentioned, brewers may also choose to add other things into the beer, like fruit or coffee or lactose in some cases, or even other microorganisms, which we'll touch on later, or any number of other ingredients to impart different flavors, aromas, colors, or mouthfeels to the beer. Honestly, the sky's the limit, and craft breweries these days, some of them go wild with this stuff. Like, there's a lot of very interesting experimental additions over and above these basic 4 ingredients. So that's where the other category comes in there. And some of the beers that I'm tasting today do in fact have some of these additives. And as just an aside here, I don't know if I really made it clear, but if you're wondering what a craft beer is, what makes it different from just any other beer, it's really a matter of who is doing the brewing and on what scale. Think of it like comparing, like a mom and pop burger joint in your town to McDonald's, right? So a craft beer is simply a beer produced by a smaller, usually independent brewery at smaller scale. It could be as small as a single brew pub brewing beers just for serving in their premises, or it could be part of a larger network of breweries that exist in a region, but that still distribute more or less just regionally, versus the big multinational companies that produce beer that's distributed globally. Your Budweisers, your Coors, these sorts of things, right? So when I say a craft brew, all I mean is these smaller, more locally, usually independently produced beers. I just figured that was important to clarify there. So these are the ingredients that go into a beer. Now there are other things, of course, that do influence the flavor and style of beer. Beers can be aged, for example, like wine, in a barrel, to impart different flavors. Some brewers age their beer in wine barrels, in fact, to give some of that wine flavor to the beer, or in bourbon barrels to create a sort of a deeper, boozier character in the brew. All that is well beyond the scope of this video. We're already getting pretty into the weeds here, so but I just wanted to let you know that there's so much more out there in both the ingredients and the brewing process that can affect the final outcome and the flavors and aromas and colors and all that. But for now, let's rein it back in and let's talk about the family tree of beer. So now that we have a basic understanding of what goes into beer and a little bit of an understanding of the process by which it's made, we can finally talk about the different styles of beer and what makes each style taste and look different from one another. So there are, of course, dozens of styles of beer, which is, as we talked about earlier, both exciting and fun, but potentially also intimidating. But the good news is there are really only two main types of beer: ales and lagers. Pretty much every kind of beer you've ever heard of falls into one of those two categories, is effectively a sub-style of one of those two main types, ales or lagers. The key difference between an ale and a lager is the type of yeast that is used in brewing the beer. Remember when I said the yeast is very important. Ales use a type of yeast called Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is actually the same type of yeast that's used in baking bread, while lagers use a close cousin called Saccharomyces pastorianus. So these different yeasts affect the final outcome, and I'm just going to how am I going to draw this here? I didn't think this through very well. You know what? I'm gonna just erase the dotted line from the other category over here, and it's just gonna sit over there by itself because I want to be able to draw a line from yeast here. So from beer, we're gonna split out into ales over there, lagers over here. Ales, like that, a little larger so you can read it a little better. I think I probably should have thought through my visual aids a little bit more, or tested it out. This is very tough to do, and effectively on camera. That's okay. I'm not sure that it's really going to help you much, but you know, I was gonna draw a thing from the yeast to each of the ales and the lagers here, but I think I'm just gonna put the type of yeast under each category here. You'll see what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can spell this right. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, Cerevisiae. You're not going to be able to read this. But anyway. And then under lagers, we have Saccharomyces, Pastorianus, Pastorianus. I believe that is correct. So, there you go. So beer splits into two major types. Think of it like like biology, you know, like all living organisms, right? Up at the very top, all living things are categorized into just a few main categories, right? We've got animals, we've got plants, we've got fungi. So it's kind of like that. At the very highest level, we have ales and lagers, and they're dictated by the type of yeast that they're brewed with. I'm going to reinstate the dotted line from the other category that goes into our beer here. This is a terrible visual aid. Okay. Another key difference between ales and lagers is the temperature of fermentation. Ales are fermented at warmer temperatures, closer to room temperature, and typically take a few weeks to ferment. Whereas lagers, on the other hand, are fermented at cooler temperatures, closer to the temperatures in your refrigerator, and they can take months to ferment. So that's another big difference between ales and lagers. I'm just going to put this aside for the moment because it's just so awkward. And so these two brewing pathways with different yeasts at different temperatures for different fermentation periods result in different overarching flavor characteristics between ales and lagers. Ales tend to be aromatic, often a bit fruity, whereas lagers tend to be crisp and clean. But, okay, we have two styles of beer, but what about all those other styles of beer? You know, things like IPAs, things like stouts, things like sours. You know, surely you've seen those or at least heard of them. Well, that is where all the other ingredients that we talked about come in. Remember when I said earlier that the malts are dried, heat dried typically? Well, they can be made lighter or darker depending on how long you roast them for. Think of it like toast in your toaster, right? If you toast it for just a little amount of time, you get a light golden, toast. But if you toast it for a long time, you get a really dark brown or even burnt black toast, right? Depending on how long you leave it in there for. So, and of course, those different kinds of toasts taste and smell very different as well. And the same is true of the malts, the grains that go into beer. So the amount of roasting changes the color and the flavors, and that is how we get lighter or darker colored beers. It's pretty straightforward, actually. And also, different combinations of grains are going to create different flavors and mouth feels. For example, oats are often added to beer to make the beer hazy, kind of cloudy, and to have a smooth, silky mouth feel. Again, different blends of grains can achieve different flavors and mouth feels. We also talked earlier about how different varieties of hops have different flavors and aromas, and brewers will mix and match these different varieties of hops. They'll blend them like you would seasonings or spices in a dish in the kitchen. But besides just the variety, the type of hops that you're using, or the blend of types, we can also vary the amount of hops in the beer, and that obviously affects the flavor. And we can even vary when in the brewing process those hops are added. So all of these characteristics of hops and malts that we described earlier influence the the flavor of the beer. And then finally, we have all those optional sorts of things that we touched on, like you can add in, fruit puree or coffee. We have those treatments like barrel aging, and then taken together, we have dozens, maybe hundreds of different sub-styles of ales and lagers, certainly dozens. I don't actually know what the real number is, but many dozens of sub-styles of underneath ales and lagers, and virtually infinite possible unique brews and beers, right? So today I'm going to taste and describe some of the most popular sub-styles under the ales and under the lagers. We will talk a bit about each style. I will pour it out. I'll show it to you so we can see the color, the clarity, all that, and I'll describe the flavor a little bit, and hopefully that will allow us to fill out our family tree of beers down here a little bit, so that you will have a better sense of where some of these most popular styles fit in the tree and what to expect from them. So that the next time you go to a restaurant or a liquor store and you're looking at all those different styles, you will be equipped with some understanding of what to expect from each different one. So it's time to get into tasting some beer. So I have here 8 different beers representing 8 different styles, and all the beers that I am going to be showing you here today are from craft breweries in my region, but I'm sure that you can find equivalent beers and equivalent styles from breweries in your area. We are quite lucky in my part of the world to have so many to choose from, but the craft brewing scene is heating up all around the world. Not even heating up, it has heated up. It has really taken off in many parts of the world, and even some larger multinational breweries are taking on some of these different styles these days as well. So first up, we have today a classic lager. This is the most popular style of beer in the world, and it includes beers like Budweiser and Coors, all these familiar names. Here I have the Islander Lager from Vancouver Island Brewing. I live on Vancouver Island, so this is brewed here in Victoria, British Columbia. So let's crack it open and we'll see what it's like. Okay, I'll try and pour out just a little bit here. I've got my very small glass, so there we go. That was more or less successful. Do a little more. You can hear it fizz. So this lager pours a beautiful, bright, clear golden color, which is typical of lagers. Look at my hit through the glass. It's very good, isn't it? And as you might be able to guess from what we were discussing earlier, this would be brewed with pale barley malts, and it's only lightly hopped, so it'll have low bitterness and a nice, crisp finish. So let's try it out. Oh yeah, that's very, very drinkable. Lager beers are often considered to be refreshing, easy drinking beers. Very crushable, if you want to say, or sessionable is another term you might hear. Both mean that you can drink a lot of them fairly quickly, or, well, crushable implies quickly, I guess. Sessionable means you could drink a lot of it over a long period of time, you know, an evening of drinking beer. These really are small little glasses. I actually tried to find some that were like more mid-sized, like 4 ounces maybe, just so we got a little more beer in them, but these were the best I could find on short notice. But nice carbonation to it. Nice, like I said, crisp, clean finish. Well balanced, you know, but more malt forward than hops for sure. And very refreshing. A nice summery kind of beer. Now there are many sub-styles of lagers, as we discussed, and I'm going to just list a few of them here because I don't have them as examples necessarily, but just so we have something over here on the lager side. Some other styles that you might have heard of include Pilsners, very, very popular. How am I going to do this? Sure, we'll just do an arrow, you know, just make a list. Pilsner. You might have heard of the Vienna lagers. And all these styles have their own, you know, unique aspects to them, which we're not going to get in here today because, quite frankly, I don't know what makes all of them unique anyway. But suffice to say, they are all sub-styles of lager. You might have heard of Helles before, and you might have heard of, or maybe tried, Mexican lagers. I don't know why I'm pluralizing some, singularizing others. Lager. Okay. Yeah, Mexican lagers. So, Mexican lagers are brewed with flakes of corn, which gives them a distinct flavor, and you're probably familiar with the most popular varieties. Corona being one, Dos Equis being another, but there's lots of Mexican style lager beers out there, many of which are very popular. And I do have one here today for us to try. By us, I mean me, but I will show it to you. That is this right here. This is the Maze Mexican Lager from Ile Sauvage Brewing, which means Wild Island in French. And these guys are based in Victoria, British Columbia as well. So the Wild Island, the Ile Sauvage they're referring to, would be Vancouver Island here as well. So let's try this out. I've not had this one before. All right, let's see if we can pour it out gently and carefully. So, one thing that I haven't been talking about here so far, but might as well mention now, is the foam on top. This is called the head, and you know, different characteristics of the head are considered characteristic of different styles, and some characteristics are considered more desirable. But when people talk about the foam or the head, they might talk about it being fluffy. If you have big fluffy mounds of it. They might talk about it being rocky, which means that there are lots of big and small and medium-sized bubbles all intermingled with one another, and that's usually considered a desirable trait. They might talk about lacing, which refers to when you tilt the glass or you take a swig and you put it down, whether the foam leaves kind of lacy patterns on the sides of the glass. Lots of characteristics that beer aficionados use to describe essentially the foam on top. Also, the time it takes for it to disappear is another one. But we're not going in that direction today. This is, like I said, a beginner's guide. We're already kind of getting a little beyond that. So, but you can see that this maize lager pours a deeper, richer gold. And it actually looks a little bit hazy in the glass to me. And that might mean that it's unfiltered. Beers can be filtered or unfiltered, which obviously affects the amount of suspended solids in there, the cloudiness, and of course the flavor and aroma. It has definitely a different character to it than that Islander lager that I tried earlier, and also has a different scent than just other Mexican lagers that I've tried. So let's try it out. Yeah, that is a little bit different, and that's cool because oftentimes, you know, with a more mainstream Mexican lager, you don't get a whole lot of unique flavor from the corn that's been added, but this definitely has its own identity. It's a little bit sweeter, a little bit fuller bodied, which means that there's just a bit more flavor going on there. And a fairly sweet finish. But interesting and, you know, different enough from that Highlander lager that it definitely stands on its own as a, you know, distinctive style. So Mexican lagers are definitely one that you are likely to come across. Now, all the styles of lagers that I've talked about here are light beers with a pale color, usually a golden, from light gold to deeper gold, like we saw here, maybe even verging on, you know, towards coppery amber, but light in color. So made with lighter malts, of course. Lagers can be made with dark malts, but it's less common, I would say. One style of dark lager that you might occasionally see is a German style called a Schwarzbier, which I think literally means black beer. And I've had some dark lagers before, and they have that roasty, toasty, you know, roasted malt flavor that you would expect from a darker beer, like a darker ale, you know. But unfortunately, I was not able to find any dark lagers for this video because, well, I'm guessing it's because it's the summertime. It's the middle of the summer here right now. And beers and breweries have a bit of a seasonality to them. Usually it's typical, although not always the case, but, you know, typical that breweries will bring out lighter beers with sort of more crisp or refreshing and fruity or sour flavor profiles in the summertime, and then sort of reserve the darker, fuller bodied, heavier, more, you know, roasty, toasty beers for the fall and winter months. So yeah, I was unable to find a dark lager for this video here today, unfortunately. But I will put the Schwarzbier on our list of lagers here. This visual aid is rapidly becoming, less and less useful. Schwarzbier, how do I spell that? Schwarzbier. And then I'm just going to put underneath many more. These are, of course, I will again stress, nowhere close to all the styles of lagers that exist out there. This is just a small sampling, but hopefully we've touched on a few that you might encounter out there in the wild. So now let's switch over to the ale side of things. So with the ales over here on the left-hand side, I guess maybe I should have gone left to right. It might have been more intuitive. Anyway, we started on the right. With the ales, of course, brewed with that Saccharomyces cerevisiae, we're going to have a bit more diversity. There's a lot of different styles of ales, and I have 6 different examples of ales here today. So we're going to have to make good use of our space over here. But the first one that we're going to look at is probably the most common type of ale that you're likely to encounter, and that is the classic pale ale, which is brewed with pale malts and is typically modestly hopped to create a nice balanced malt and hop flavor where neither overpowers the other. You get kind of a biscuity aspect from the malts, and then a bit of bitterness and a drier finish coming from those hops. Again, these rules are made to be broken. You will find a wide variety of pale ales out there, some much more hoppy, some much more malty, but generally speaking, kind of somewhere in that balanced range. So let's put, let's go out here. We'll put an arrow. We'll go pale ale out here. All right, so pale ale resides off on this side. And I have here, let's just put this back. I have here a example of a pale ale. This is the Sprout Lake Pale Ale from A-Frame Brewing. A-Frame Brewing. That right there is the outline of Sprout Lake. A-Frame Brewing is based out of Squamish, British Columbia, but the lake itself, Sprout Lake, is a popular recreational lake on Vancouver Island. Again, the island where I live, whereas Squamish is over on the mainland. But it looks like this brewery, A-Frame Brewing, has a bunch of beers named after different well-known lakes in British Columbia. So this is a classic, what they call American style pale ale. Evidently it's brewed with a blend of light and caramel malts, and it's hopped with some hop varieties called Cascade and Citra, which is going to bring sort of a citrusy juiciness, as well as probably a bit of a pininess to the flavor. And so we're going to have this sort of fruity hop bitterness to balance out the sweetness of those malts. So let's open this. Yeah, I'm using a different glass each time in case you're wondering. Nice clean glass for a nice clean pour, so it's not contaminated by the previous pour. All right, let's pour this out and see if it looks any different than what we've seen so far. Oh, and a little dribble. And actually quite a bit of foam on that guy. It's okay, I brought paper towel just for such an occasion. But yeah, that one gave us a fair bit of build-up on there. Of course, part of it, the amount that you get the foam is based on how vigorously you pour and at what angle. Those who have poured a lot of beer from jugs in a restaurant or something will know that yeah, there's a trick to it. You want to tilt the glass a little bit if you don't want it to be this much beer at the bottom and then just a bunch of foam on top. But this one actually doesn't look dramatically different than that Mexican lager we tried most recently. This is sort of a deep gold, only just the faintest hint of that caramel color in there, but really it's sort of a deep golden pour. But I bet you it tastes quite different. So just the scent, I can definitely smell the hops in here, whereas before with those two lagers the hops were barely present. Here though, I can smell that pininess, especially that piney sort of resinous flavor of the hops is quite apparent, and a little bit of biscuitiness from the malts as well. So let's try this out, shall we? Yeah, so this has a fair bit more flavor than the previous two beers, and the hops are definitely much more present. Now, they're not punch you in the face strong, and actually the finish is really nicely balanced. It's not too dry, not too bitter. It's a very well-rounded beer, but you can definitely taste that kind of greenness, that pininess of the hops, and a little bit of that citrus as well. It's very nice. It's a really, I've not had this one before, but it's a very nicely balanced pale ale. That's good. I like that. But the hops are definitely much more noticeable than in those lager styles that we tried earlier. So if you like flavorful malts and then also a nice hop bitterness to balance it out, and some of those interesting hop flavors, like really fairly classic hop flavors here with that pininess, that citrus, then a pale ale is a great choice. And as I said, there can be a pretty wide variety in the style, but if you know you don't mind some hops and you want something that's going to have a nice full flavor, sort of middle of the road balance, then a pale ale should suit you quite well. So you've probably got the sense that the India Pale Ale must be related to the pale ale somehow. And you've probably heard of India Pale Ale style. Well, we did mention it earlier, I guess. You heard about it then, but you probably heard about it before that as well. The India Pale Ale, or IPA for short, is the more heavily hopped sibling of the classic pale ale. And IPAs are very popular these days amongst craft beer enthusiasts, but they are traditionally known for their bitterness, and that can be a turnoff for some people. IPAs can be a lot, especially if you're more accustomed to those very lightly hopped lager style beers. But if you're willing to dive in, there's a lot of really exciting and interesting flavors amongst IPAs, and they need not all be bitter. We will talk about that a bit in a second, but the traditional IPA certainly is, it has that hop punch and is typically fairly bitter. So let's, we'll say from pale ale, we go to India Pale Ale, brackets, IPA. All right, so we're building out our tree, our family tree of beers. So, here today, I have one of my favorite representatives of this style, and in fact, one of my favorite local beers, period. Because I do enjoy sort of that hop bitterness, that pungent hop punch. And I have here the Fat Tug IPA from Driftwood Brewing. I'm trying to see. There's the logo. They are located in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And yeah, they're one of my favorite local breweries. They have lots of great beers, but this is one of their best. And it is a hop monster. They've got a lot going on in there. So this is what they call a West Coast style IPA, or Northwest style IPA, and they tend to have that bitter hop flavor. And this one is intensely hopped. It has some fruity undertones like grapefruit, melon, and definitely that lingering hop bitterness. So let's crack it open. You can smell it right off the bat. That very, very piney, grapefruity scent is undeniable. All right, let's pour it out. I haven't been talking about alcohol content in these beers, but that is obviously a component as well. This one's a little on the stronger side. I think Fat Tug is 7%. Yes, 7%. Oftentimes, a lighter brew will have, well, I don't even want to say that's necessarily true. I'm sure there is some relationship between alcohol content and, color and things like that, but generally speaking, it seems like it can be all over the map. And I'm sure that comes down to a whole bunch of factors in the brewing process, but that's beyond my, level of expertise. But suffice it to say that, breweries seem to have have it down in terms of controlling the amount of alcohol they want out of a beer. Probably some of it has to do with how much yeast they put in, maybe how much of that, the wort we were talking about earlier, gets consumed versus how much is left as residual sugars. I don't know. Maybe a brewer in the audience can help me out there. How do you control the ultimate, the final alcohol content of your beer? It'd be nice to know. Anyway, so here we have, again, a fairly pale looking pour, a light gold. In fact, not that far off that very first lager that we poured, but the pale malts are playing second fiddle to the rich hop flavor and aromas going on here. So, yeah, Yeah, this one has a lot of that sort of melony fruitiness, but many of these more subtle kind of undertones are a bit of a, you kind of have to develop a palate for it, because if you are unfamiliar with the styles and the bitterness of the hops, that can be very overwhelming. And some might try this out and say, well, it's just bitter. All I taste is bitter. There's a lot of other stuff going on there, but, bitter is, of course, sort of a predominant and overbearing aspect of the style. So good, though. I really do. I really do like this stuff. This is one of my favorites. It's got enough of a malt body in there that it's not all hops, but hops are definitely the number one attraction. But it's very good. Now, of course, another aspect of this that we're not going to get into today, but it's worth mentioning, is that different kinds of beer pair differently with different kinds of food. And there's a whole art to pairing your beers with your food, just like there is with wine. Again, that's well beyond the scope of this video, and frankly, I'm not any expert in that, but it's something I would like to learn more about myself. Anyway, the strong Northwest style IPAs like this, I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to somebody just venturing away from lagers, for example, for the first time, or people who don't like bitter flavors. But if you're looking for something more intense, and really getting into that very heavily hopped kind of style, then IPAs are where it's at, and they're packed with flavor. But just because you don't like bitter doesn't mean that you can't enjoy IPAs. And I did hint at this earlier. There's a style of IPA called the New England style, also sometimes simply called a hazy IPA. You've probably heard of a hazy IPA before, which does away with the intense bitterness and favors a kind of softer flavor profile that focuses on the juicy and tropical flavors of the hops, and a smooth mouthfeel while curbing that bitterness to a large degree. Brewers accomplish this neat trick by adding the hops during the fermentation period rather than during the boiling phase of the production. And for one reason or another, that really curbs the bitterness of the hops. And the haziness of this style comes from the addition of oats and wheat to the malts, and because the beer is unfiltered, and that haziness is desirable because it confers that smoother, thicker mouthfeel. Some people say it's kind of like a velvety kind of mouthfeel. So here today I have the Low Viz Hazy IPA. Low Viz Hazy IPA from Whistleboy Brewing. Whistleboy. This is a small brew pub here in Victoria, British Columbia. And I have to imagine that the low viz refers to conditions out on the water where it gets foggy, thick, like pea soup. And this beer is, of course, kind of like that because it is going to be cloudy, hazy. So let's crack this one open. So just because they are lower on the bitterness does not mean that hazy IPAs are less aromatic or flavorful. They often emphasize, those other nice flavors that you get out of hops. I'm getting some papaya and mango notes out of this one, definitely. So it really emphasizes the fruity nature of the hops. Let's pour this one out. And this should look a fair bit different than what we've seen so far. And indeed it does. That is hazy for sure. You can't see my face through that one. You can see it's a nice bright color with pale malts, but that haziness from the oats and the wheat definitely changes the nature of the beer. And yeah, this smells really nice. Like I said, definitely those tropical fruit flavors, a bit of melon in there as well. I've not tried this beer before, so it's new to me. Let's give it a shot. That is very nice. That is very nice. Guava. I'm getting guava. Yummy. Yeah, definite guava flavor. And that nice, smooth mouthfeel as well. There is still some bitterness. It's unavoidable with something that's relatively heavily hopped, but it is definitely curtailed compared to something like the Fat Tug IPA, which revels in the sharpness of its hoppy bitterness. This much softer, kind of rounded off bitterness. And for that reason, hazy IPAs are a great option for people who want to start exploring or continue exploring the many flavors that hops can offer, especially those nice, juicy, fruity, tropical notes without the harsh, some potentially overbearing bitterness of other styles of IPA. So hazy IPAs are great for that. Speaking of hazy beers, you may also be familiar with wheat beers, also sometimes called Hefeweizen. Hefeweizen or Hefes are a German style of wheat beer. Popular brands of wheat beers include Blue Moon or Shock Top. These are from big multinationals, so you might be familiar with them. I think those are Belgian style wheat beers. But wheat beers are brewed with a larger proportion of wheat relative to barley and are also often unfiltered, like the hazy IPA. The hazy IPA does often have some wheat in it as well, but the wheat beers, that being their name, will have more proportionally. Wheat beers are also often spiced. They might use herbs like coriander, things like that, and often complemented by fruit flavors. Orange is a very popular, fruit addition. But they're rarely heavily hopped, and so they tend to have very, very low bitterness. So for a wheat beer here today, I have fun looking one, carrying on with the tropical fruit vibe. I've got the Hawaii 5-0 pineapple, as I say here, dry hopped pineapple wheat ale. And oh gee, speaking of which, I have to update our family tree of beers. Let's do that right now. So we have IPA, but then we have hazy IPA on here. Let's put that down here. Hazy IPA. And this is all under ales, as we discussed. And then we're also going to have here wheat beer. Say wheat ales. So there, so we've got our tree of pale ale, India Pale Ale, and hazy India Pale Ale over here. We've got the wheat ale here. And as I was demonstrating earlier, or showing you earlier, our wheat beer here has a few things going on, some interesting stuff. I think I said earlier, I'm pretty sure I said, yeah, we were just talking about how wheat ales are often not very heavily hopped, so they tend to have fairly low bitterness. On the contrary, this one says right up front that it is dry hopped. So what's up with that? Well, this is more heavily hopped, but it uses a hopping technique called dry hopping, which also cuts down on the bitterness of the hops and focuses on the aromatic qualities of the hops, similar to what we were talking about with the Hazy IPA. And in this particular case, with this beer, it also has pureed pineapple added to it, and then that dry hopping with, let's see, what kind of hops do they use here? They don't say. But I think the idea is to accentuate or complement the pineapple flavors and aromas with those notes in the hops as well, without introducing a bunch of hop bitterness. And that's where the dry hopping comes in. So this is from Swift Brewing, also here in Victoria, British Columbia. I told you we have an outrageous number of breweries around here. I have not tried this one before either, so let's give it a shot. Ooh, that's fizzy. What's that? Wheat beers are often fairly fizzy, quite heavily carbonated. And as a result, you often get a lot of foam from pouring out a wheat beer. We will see if we get those. Well, we don't really have big enough glasses to get big mounds of foam, but we'll see. It's a little bit of pineapple scent, but it's pretty restrained. Let's see if we can get a clean pour. Maybe a little bit of mess, but not too bad. Just a couple drips. Just gonna wipe it up there. So we don't actually have a whole lot of foam on there, and what we did have dissipated pretty quickly. And it's a very pale looking pour, isn't it? It's like a very pale straw color. And you can see it is hazy, so it is unfiltered, but very, very pale on the malt side of things, as wheat beers tend to be. Yeah, there's not a lot of pineapple in the aroma, but we'll see if it tastes a little more so. Let's try. Pleasant. It's light-bodied, very refreshing. Yeah, there is some juiciness there. Some juicy pineapple for sure. But very, very light, very easy drinking. And, the hopping is clearly bringing some of those fruity tropical notes into the flavor profile, but no bitterness, like almost none whatsoever. So true to a wheat beer style, it maintains that low bitterness, despite the heavier hopping. So this is a pretty atypical wheat beer. Like I said, you know, they're often, at least if you're going with one of those sort of Belgian style ones, you know, a bit spiced, you know, not very heavily hopped. This is kind of a weirdo, but good. It's tasty. It's nice, but doesn't have the typical flavor profile that I associate with a wheat beer. But I'm not complaining. It is very refreshing. That's a great summer sipper. That would be really nice on a sunny, hot day. So overall, wheat beers are a great choice if you want something with low bitterness, smooth mouthfeel, and oftentimes a bit of a spiced and somewhat fruity flavor profile. Speaking of fruity, we've talked a lot about how, you know, hops add fruit flavors to beers, but oftentimes brewers will also just add fruit. And that is very commonly done with the next style, which is the sour ale. So, pardon me, this is one of the challenges of trying to drink a bunch of beer in a video. It's all carbonated. So if you're looking for something fruity and you don't mind, you know, a little bit more bite, a sour ale might be a great choice for you. Sour ales are tart and acidic and often brewed with various fruit additions and have a wonderful, refreshing, and summery vibe, which is why sour ales are very common at this time of year in the summer. The sour flavor usually comes from the addition of another microbe. So remember how yeast is so critical to our brewing process. But I mentioned that sometimes other microbes might be added. In this case, the brewers usually add a type of bacteria in the genus Lactobacillus. And these Lactobacillus bacteria produce lactic acid, which gives the ale its sour, tart flavor. Sours are often very bright in their flavor profile, exciting and flavorful, but they do also taste pretty different from the lager beers that many people are used to drinking. And so they can be an acquired taste. Some people try them and just, yeah, because it is sour, right? They kind of have that puckering sourness, that acidity, and that tartness. So they can definitely be an acquired taste. But if you like the idea of like kind of a fruity, cocktaily kind of thing, then maybe sours might be up your alley. So here I've got a sour. This I have tried before, and I know it's a really good one. This is the Weekend Rambler Mango Sour. Weekend Rambler Mango Sour from Mount Arrowsmith Brewing. Mount Arrowsmith Brewing. These guys are located in Parksville, British Columbia, which is here on Vancouver Island. And you can see they're really leaning into that tropical, summery vibe. It is very much that kind of beer. So let's crack it open. Ooh, this one's foamy. Vigorous foam. Let you guys hear it because it's kind of nice. This sour is loaded with delicious mango flavor because they have added pureed mango to the brew. But then they also have lightly dry hopped it with a type of hops called Sabro hops. That's the variety. which is known for having mango notes as well. The dry hopping curbs that bitterness and brings out those aromatic mango notes, which complement the actual mango in this sour really well. So this is a classic kind of fruit sour, although oftentimes, maybe classic is the wrong term, because it's uncommon that they are hop forward. Oftentimes fruit sours are very lightly hopped, and the hops are not a significant part of the flavor. Whereas here, they're definitely notable or noticeable. You can smell them, and I know you can taste them because, as I said, I've had this before. So let's pour it out. A couple of drips. Listen to that one foam. I often find that with sours, they foam really vigorously at first. And then that foam recedes very rapidly, and that the bubbles in the foam, like you can see here, are quite coarse. They're bigger, coarser bubbles. And you can just watch it fading away there. Pretty soon there'll be no foam left. And there is a reason for that, a biochemical reason for that. And I actually had it explained to me once by a member of our channel community, a viewer who is also a beer biochemist, works with breweries to develop presumably yeasts and things like that, or to maintain their strains. Anyway, he explained it to me once, but I've completely forgotten what the reasoning behind it was. So I don't know why sours tends to do that. But anyway, it's often the case. So you can see here that this sour is unfiltered. We've got that hazy look to it, and it looks juicy. It looks just like mango juice almost, which makes sense because it does have that pureed mango in it. And the flavor, very different from anything that we've seen here so far tonight. It has that acidity, has that sourness. But the sourness is very nicely counterbalanced by the sweetness of the mango and complemented by that light dry hopping with the Sabro hops. Very, very pleasant. A lovely summer afternoon sipping beer if you can get over the sourness. Again, some people just find it too weird. They don't want their beer sour, and that's fine. But you know, if you're looking to experiment a little bit, branch out a little bit, or if you want to try some different beers and you're not a big fan of classic sort of bready flavor, you know, that you get from lagers or from a pale ale, then maybe a sour is exactly what you're looking for. Maybe it's different enough that it's not really that much like beer for you anymore. At any rate, sours come in all kinds of flavors, often with fruit additions. This one is very pale, very light in color, but you can get dark sours as well. I've had some nice stone fruit sours that are on the darker side, or a nice blueberry sour that was a dark sour. So they're not just lighter colored. So we're going to say sour ales. That's going to go right there under the ales part of the family tree. And that brings us to our last beer that I'm going to be tasting here. Now you might have noticed that everything we've looked at here has been pretty light. But of course, there are darker ales as well. And the dark side can be very tempting, very luring indeed. As I said earlier, it's because there's a sort of a seasonality to the brewing industry. Right now, the shelves are loaded with these light, crisp, bright, summery, fruity kinds of beers, and they are delicious. But not so many of the darker styles on the shelves right now. But there are very many well-known darker ales, which you are probably familiar with. Some styles that you've no doubt heard are porters and stouts. The most popular stout in the world, of course, is Guinness, which I could have picked up if I wanted, but I wanted to try and keep that local theme going on here. So I do have one dark beer here that is produced locally, and that is the Stoutnik. The Stoutnik Imperial Stout from Longwood Brewery in Nanaimo, British Columbia, also on Vancouver Island. Stouts are, by definition, made with dark malts, really roasted, toasty malts. They are dark and smooth, and the roasted malts impart very toasty chocolate and coffee notes to the flavor. Dark beers have a distinctly different flavor profile than the lighter, paler ones. And, you recognize it right away when you have a darker beer. And they tend to be more malt forward, with the hops usually taking a back seat. Some are a little more well balanced. I think this is actually a little more balanced, a little more hopped. But oftentimes the hops really sit in the background with a stout. And so they have a sweeter flavor profile overall. And in fact, many breweries lean into that, and they brew their stouts with additions of actual chocolate or actual coffee or vanilla. So you get a lot of sort of dessert beers in the stouts. And of course, those flavors really complement those flavor notes from the dark roasted malts. So let's crack open the Stoutnik. The Stoutnik. If I drink enough of this, I will indeed be very stout. This is, as I said, an imperial stout, which just means that it's stronger. As you can see, it's 7.5% and more flavorful than a non-imperial version. It's just more of everything. Similarly, you might sometimes see things referred to as like a double IPA, different from a Belgian double. We're not going to get into that right now, but yeah, which again means just more flavor, usually more alcohol. So let's pop this open. All right. And I don't know, I was trying to go side to side. I don't remember what side we poured on last time. We'll do this here this time. Here we go. You can kind of hear, even just from the way it poured, and the fact that it's pretty mellow here, not fizzing vigorously, you kind of get the sense that it's a bit more viscous, right? A bit more syrupy. And that is absolutely the case. These are definitely denser. It pours this beautiful, deep, dark brown. And not quite black, but not far off. And certainly by far the darkest beer that we've had here today. Again, I kind of wish I could have shown you a wider spectrum of colors, because there's all kinds of beautifully colored beers that sit sort of in between the paler ones and the darker ones. You get copper and amber colored beers, and but just wasn't able to find many of those on the shelf. So again, the scent is definitely got those coffee notes, very distinctly roasty. Let's try it. Much smoother mouthfeel, smoother even, I would say, than the Hazy IPA. And a nice, honestly, the flavor profile is less coffee, leans more towards sort of the chocolatey syrup kind of side of things. It's not that thick, it's not like literally pancake syrup, but it's got a smoother, heavier mouthfeel. But as far as stouts go, this one is fairly well balanced with a bit of hoppiness in there as well. So it's got a drier finish than some stouts. Some stouts do have a very sweet, almost cloying finish. This is definitely on the drier side. But it's nice for that. It's a tasty one. And I think it's actually an award winner. I don't know, it's won some kind of award at some kind of show. In fact, a number of these beers have. But a very tasty one, and very different flavor than the lighter ones that we've taken a look at here previously. So stouts can be great if you want a sweeter beer, or sometimes leaning towards that more balanced side, but generally not hop forward, with that distinctively roasty dark malt flavor. But they can be quite heavy and very filling. Truly, if you have a whole pint, it'll fill you up. And so they're not the kind of beer that you're going to be drinking a bunch of in a row necessarily. And they're not as crisp or refreshing as the lighter styles. So again, that's why people often prefer them in those colder winter months when you're cozied up by the fire or something, rather than these sort of crisp and refreshing beers that we get in the summertime. But certainly worth exploring the darker side of beers if those kinds of flavors sound good to you. And that, dear friends, brings us to the end of our exploration of styles here. I'm just going to finish off our family tree of beers by adding a couple of darker styles in here. We'll add porters, and we'll add stouts, which again fall under the ales. And so this is going to be our finished family tree of beer. Now, I really want to stress again that this is just a tiny sampling of some of the more popular and common styles of beer that you might encounter out there. And I really wanted to try and kind of get a cross-section across lagers and ales, so that hopefully, should you encounter these in a liquor store or on a drink list, or at your friend's barbecue or whatever, you might be able to make a slightly more informed choice about what you might enjoy, because really that's what this is all about. It's about finding stuff that you enjoy exploring and tasting. There's no right or wrong when it comes to any of this. It's fine to like only lagers. It's fine to like only sours. It's fine to hate IPAs. It's fine to love IPAs. There's no right or wrong. It's whatever you enjoy the most. And certainly there is a wide world of options out there. I do wish that we had time to touch on some more different styles and whatnot, but I hope I've given you a decent survey here now, and that you are better equipped to make some beer tasting decisions in the future. A very quick but sincere shout out to this channel's supporters. This video topic was selected by our Fusro and Fusro Da tier supporters on my YouTube memberships, and on my Patreon. You will see the names of those folks in just a few minutes. At the end of the video, you'll see the credits for all those amazing supporters. But at those two tiers, every month I put out a poll where those individuals can vote on a video topic, and in that way have some say in the types of videos that are here on the channel. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can always check out the links in the video description, and maybe you'll find a tier there that's right for you if you'd like to join us. And by the way, again, I've said it at the beginning, but I am no expert, I'm no professional, just someone who likes drinking beer. Hopefully I got everything right here, but if you want to learn more, dive a little deeper, I will put a few links down in the video description to websites that I drew from for this video and that I found very informative as well. So maybe that'll start your journey down the craft beer rabbit hole. I have to say, doing the research for this video and putting it together makes me really want to try some of my own home brewing. Maybe that's an adventure that I will undertake in the not too distant future. I'll have to do a little bit more research to see exactly what that entails, but I like the idea. I'll keep you guys updated on that. All right, friends, thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope this is what you had in mind. I realize it is very long and it probably a little bit more in the weeds than it needed to be for a beginner's guide to beer, but if you made it to the end, congratulations. I do hope that you found it interesting and informative, but above all, I hope you found it relaxing, and I look very forward to having you back here next time. Farewell for now, my friends. And here we are, as promised, the credits, if you will, for all of this channel's amazing supporters on Patreon and YouTube memberships. These incredible individuals help support what I do here, the kind of content that I like to create the most, and hopefully that you all enjoy listening to and watching the most as well. I cannot thank them enough for their kindness. And this video, as I mentioned, is the supporters choice video for the month of June. It's a little bit late, but for the month of June 2024, and our members at the Fusro and Fusro Da tiers get to vote on this video every month. So I put up a poll with 3 different options each month. So big thanks to everyone who voted in this month's poll for this video. There is, of course, a very special tier amongst our supporters, the Fusro Da tier, that not only gets to vote each month in that poll, but also gets their names read out in a special spoken shout out in every single video. And it is, as always, my great honor to read to you those names now in, let's say, random order. Today we're going to start with Captain Vanquisher, Drummer Brit, Jake Luffney, Smitty, Odin's Son, Bruce Buchner, K. Time, and Ragnar Ragnarsson. Might not have been totally random, but I tried to mix it up a little bit. These are our amazing Fusroda tier supporters. I cannot thank them enough for their kindness and generosity. Please also welcome me, join me in welcoming 2 new members to our supporters over in the YouTube memberships. Please welcome JBZ23 and Phase Beast. It's wonderful to have you both on board. Welcome to the YouTube memberships, fam. Thank you all once again so much, supporters, for your kindness, and all of those of you watching, listening. If you are not already one of these supporters but would like to be, don't forget to check out the link down below at the top of the video description. There you will find links for both Patreon and my YouTube memberships, and I'm sure you will find a tier that is right for you. Thanks again, supporters.